The iPad mini 6 is one of the best / most frustrating Apple devices out right now. Let me explain. How's it going, y'all? It has been Aqua. This is the pink 64GB edition of the iPad mini 6. It's actually the third one that I've gotten since its release in September of 2021. And the reason I keep getting and returning this thing is because I apparently can't get enough of it, and then I get really frustrated by certain things about it. So in this video, we're gonna talk about the pros and the cons of the iPad mini 6. And be sure to comment down below on which iPad you prefer. Do you prefer the iPad mini 6 or an older one? Do you prefer the iPad Air, iPad Pro? I would love to hear from y'all in the comments. So the biggest thing I love about the iPad mini 6 is the size. I mean, look how freaking cute this thing is. I can actually hold it in one hand, and I love that it has a lot of the features and the power of the bigger iPad Pro 11-inch or the iPad Air in a smaller form factor. And I've said this before and I still believe it. I think it's that perfect size in between an iPhone and a larger iPad, where you don't necessarily want to, lug out a giant iPad to use, but you'd rather just use something a little bit smaller. But it's also bigger than a phone, so it has more screen real estate. You can do multitasking on this thing. I mean, it's just a beast in a really tiny package. But just because it has this really tiny form factor, do not skimp on the power that this has, because it has the A15 chip, which is the same chip that powers the iPhone 13 series. So if you have an iPhone 13, you know what I'm talking about. The processor is insane in this thing. I mean, it's just zippy. Everything is instant, basically. There's not really a whole lot of times when I've really felt this iPad mini 6 slow down ever. Gaming, everything, super buttery. The iPad mini 6 is $499, and I actually got this for $409 on sale from Amazon, and I'll leave links to buy it in the description below. And another thing about the size of this that I really can't get enough of is how fun it is to use. There's something about this form factor and this size that just makes me want to use it when it's just sitting there on the desk. It's kind of like an iPhone in that way, where it's just really engaging. The size of it is smaller. It doesn't feel oppressively big. Smaller iPads in general are just freaking adorable to me. And I had an iPad mini 5 before this that I upgraded from. And yeah, I can say the same thing about the iPad mini 6 than I can about the 5, that it's so fun to use. Just something is really attractive about a tiny iPad. You just want to pick it up and use it. I can't really say the same thing about the iPad Pro 11-inch, which I have. It's a 2018 model. It still works super well. But when I have the iPad mini next to the 11-inch iPad, I don't reach for the 11-inch iPad as much. I think simply because this has that really nice form factor and it's freaking adorable. Another amazing thing about this iPad mini is it has really impressive cameras. I believe this is a 12 megapixel camera on the back, and on the front there's a really nice updated ultra wide camera. Both of these cameras come really in handy when you're in a pinch and just want to take a quick photo of something, and they actually kind of rival, not as good, but they do kind of rival sometimes the quality of an iPhone camera as well. Will I be using this as my main camera? Probably not, but it's really nice to have a camera with a flash. Another huge pro of the iPad mini 6 is the screen quality. It doesn't support ProMotion, which I'm going to talk about more in a second, so scrolling on it is a little bit choppy. But colors on the mini look amazing. Sharpness is not a problem. It's really easy to read text. And because it's so powerful with that amazing screen, I'm totally fine, editing photos and stuff on this and knowing that the colors will be accurate, because it does support the P3 wide color gamut, which is fancy talk for this screen looks absolutely incredible. Another thing I love about the iPad mini 6 is it supports Apple Pencil 2, so you can charge it. And of course you can take notes on this or draw on the iPad mini. So with the iPad Pro 11-inch, I have to prop it up on my desk using a smart case, and then it's totally fine for drawing, and I actually prefer drawing on the larger iPad versus the iPad mini 6. But sometimes it's really nice to just edit a thumbnail on the iPad mini using the Apple Pencil, and drawing on here while holding this with one hand is actually really convenient, and it feels like you're holding a small notepad. Another thing that's amazing about the iPad mini is it's pretty cheap actually at $499 to start for 64 gigs or $649 for 256 gigs. That's actually an amazing price for something something that you could actually use to replace a laptop if you just need just kind of more basic apps and not the full, Final Cut Pro / Ableton Live. If you don't need like a full laptop type of experience, I would actually suggest the iPad mini to a lot of people that don't want to spend $1,000, you don't want to spend $1,500. Just spend $500 or even less on the iPad mini 6, and you can do your email on here, you can text your friends, you can FaceTime, you can basically do anything that you would normally do on a larger iPad or even a laptop on the iPad mini 6. So now let's talk about the dark side of the iPad mini 6. All good things must come to an end. So I would say the biggest con of this is the fact that it does not have ProMotion. So what that means is this display maxes out at 60 Hz refresh rate, which makes scrolling and kind of moving through the navigation and stuff a little bit choppy. Like, it's pretty smooth overall because the processor is so freaking fast, but when you're doing stuff like scrolling around a website, it does look kind of choppy to me. A lot of the things that I will do on this iPad mini are based around reading text. And when I'm scrolling around a website or something and you scroll up and down, yes, there's the jelly scroll thing. We'll talk about that in a second. But the problem for me is more in, just the way text looks when you're scrolling up and down. It has a blurriness that you will not see on a ProMotion display. Normally 60 Hz does not bother me that much, but there's something about this screen where as I'm scrolling around, scrolling up and down, it just looks blurry as hell to me, and it almost causes a little bit of eye fatigue for me, where it's just blurry as hell. I don't know, y'all. That is the biggest deal breaker for me on the iPad mini 6, and some people doesn't seem to bother them at all. It may just be a subjective thing. I know it's a subjective thing, but for me, I don't know, it's kind of inexcusable in 2022 for a display this amazing to be so jittery. I don't get it. But when you're watching videos and stuff, it looks amazing. When you're editing photos, looks totally fine, no problems there. It's just the scrolling up and down, I just can't deal with the blurriness. I don't know, I think I just need to live in a ProMotion only experience lifestyle. And speaking of jelly scroll, does it really bother me? Not really, actually. I mean, when I first was using this thing, I didn't even notice jelly scroll, but then once that came out, it's really all I could look at when I'm scrolling up and down on websites and stuff. Jelly scrolling is something that I think will divide a lot of people. Like, some people totally can deal with jelly scrolling, not a huge deal. With me, it's not a huge deal either, but yeah, you do definitely notice it when you scroll up and down with text. But if you use your iPad mini in landscape mode like this, and you're scrolling up and down, you won't notice jelly scrolling at all because it's kind of on this side of the panel. So jelly scrolling is not a deal breaker for me personally, but yeah, it is kind of annoying. Another weird thing about this iPad mini 6 is the scaling on this device is so strange. Text on this iPad is always too small, and I find myself just constantly zooming in, and I don't know, there's just something about how small / how weirdly big things are sometimes on this iPad mini where it just seems like an afterthought when it comes to the iPad OS system. Most things, not a huge deal though. I'm listening to a lot of music and Apple Music and stuff, and the scaling looks pretty much okay. Like, you almost need a freaking microscope sometimes to see things on this tiny screen. It's almost too many sometimes. And the weird thing is sometimes I will look at the same thing on my iPhone 13 Pro as well as the iPad mini 6, and the text is actually bigger on my iPhone, which doesn't make any sense to me because that's a smaller device. So scaling is freaking weird on the iPad mini. There's also no Face ID on the iPad mini 6. It does have that TouchID sensor on the top, which works really well most of the time. It's super fast. But Face ID is kind of like ProMotion in my iPad Pro, where once you get used to that, it's just so much easier, so much faster. You just tap the screen, swipe up, and then you get into your iPad. With this iPad mini, you do have to align your finger to the top. Not a huge deal, definitely a first world problem, but it is kind of annoying once you get used to Face ID. There's also no headphone jack on the iPad mini 6, and that's one thing that I do actually miss from my iPad mini 5. I'm one of the weirdos that still uses the headphone jack in their device because I listen to a lot of lossless audio in Apple Music where you need a wired pair of headphones. And I think there's also issues with quality control on the iPad mini 6. I mean, overall, it's built really, really well, but the buttons on 2 of the iPad mini 6s that I tried out of 3 have been kind of loose and weird. Like, this TouchID button out of the box is a little jiggly. And I looked it up, it's not normal, it should not be like that. But yeah, the jiggly button, it's not gonna cut it, especially when you're paying $500 for this thing. And on the first iPad mini 6 that I tried, one of the volume buttons on the top actually caved in after about a week of use. Like, it actually was indented into the iPad, and I took it to the Apple store and they were like, oh yeah, that's definitely not normal. And the last con, I think, is the 64 gigabytes of storage when you're paying $500 on a device that's from 2021. It doesn't seem like a lot in 2022. It's definitely not a lot for most people, and especially if you're loading this thing up with games, or you're adding movies or downloading a bunch of music to this or something, you're probably gonna want to upgrade to the 256 gigabyte storage version. I personally don't need all that storage, so 64 is good enough for me. But yeah, it just seems like Apple kind of cheaped out on the storage options for this device. I think they should at least have 128 gigabytes as the base level iPad mini 6. And sometimes this actually does feel a little too small when I'm multitasking and stuff. So for me, it's iPad Pro all the way, 11 inch. Love that machine. iPad mini 6 is amazing, but yeah, it just needs promotion. It needs a little bit less jitter. So those are my thoughts on the iPad mini 6. I hope you enjoyed this video. Smash the like button, subscribe down below if you're not already. Also add me on social media at B3NAQUA. And since you made it all the way to the end of this video, I would love to invite you to join the House of Aqua Discord channel. Link to that is going to be in the description for this video. Leave your comments and questions down below, and I will see you in the next one.